We are just a few short days away from Brian Kelly and company from taking the podium at SEC Media Days in Nashville on Monday. And I have a pretty good idea of what we're going to hear, not just from Brian Kelly, but also from Jayden Daniels, from Josh Williams, from Mekhi Wingo. But what I want to talk about today is not what we're going to hear, but what I want to hear from those four.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget, we're also on YouTube as well. So if you traditionally listen to us on the go on your preferred podcast platform, please keep doing it. Love that you're here. But you can also watch us on your smart TV, on your smartphone, on YouTube. Just search Locked On LSU in the search bar. Hit that subscribe button and you'll get notified as soon as the podcasts drop. Appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. And of course, for liking, commenting, subscribing, leaving a good review, all that great stuff. Just happy that you are here and happy that we are just a few short days away from Brian Kelly, from Jayden Daniels, from Josh Williams, and Mekhi Wingo from taking the podium at SEC Media Days. Now, traditionally, SEC Media Days is in Hoover near the SEC headquarters. This past year, it was in Atlanta. It was in Atlanta in 2018. This year, it's coming to my town. It's coming to Nashville. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to everyone that's going to be here potentially. So if you're going to be here, hey, come say what's up. LSU is going to kick everything off. Brian Kelly is going to be the first coach to take the podium. Greg Sankey starts everything off on day one of SEC Media Days with kind of a state of the union, a state of the SEC. And then it is Brian Kelly and LSU's time to shine. So selfishly, I love this week because I get to go, because I get to talk with not just coaches and players, but also network with media members. And it's basically a weekend full of gossiping about SEC football. And those are two of my favorite things to do. So I love this week. But I want to hear from you. I want to know what your experience is like with this upcoming week of SEC Media Days. As a fan, how do you want this event to be covered? How can I tailor my coverage to what you want to hear about? Because I think a lot of SEC Media Days, it's really just talking. It's just a whole lot of talking and speculation and hot takes and predictions and expectations of what we think might happen. And you, as a fan, you might love all of that. And that's great. That's wonderful. But if there's something different that you want to hear, let me know, because I want to make sure that this upcoming week, now that we're getting into the nitty gritty, getting into training camp, getting into, days rather than weeks, rather than months of talking about when kickoff is going to happen, I want to hear about what you want to hear about. But I think that what we can expect to hear, and this isn't just a specific thing to LSU football, but really overall as a whole, from Greg Sankey to Brian Kelly to Nick Saban to Jimbo Fisher to Kirby Smart to Josh Heupel, so on and so forth. We can expect to hear a whole lot about NIL. That's going to be a major topic of conversation across media days, across college football. We're going to hear about the transfer portal. We're going to hear a lot about conference realignment, about Texas and Oklahoma and the 8-game conference schedule and the permanent opponents and the 2024 schedule. I can expect to hear a whole lot of that because we've been hearing a whole lot of that. General college football changes, transfer portal, NIL, conference realignment, so on and so forth. That's what we've heard at media days in the past. And I don't expect this media days to be any different. So I can expect to hear that. From Brian Kelly, and more specifically to LSU, I can expect questions to be asked, and for Brian Kelly to talk about how year 2 is so much different than year 1. I think the biggest theme this week, because I think that every single year, kind of the trend that I've seen with SEC Media Days is every team has its own little theme, its own little talking points, its own little reputation for the week. And I think LSU's is going to be how different right now, July 2023, felt from July 2022. I remember I sat down with T-Bob and Jacob Hester at SEC Media Days last year in Atlanta, and they're like, "What is your expectation?" I was like, "Honestly, it could be anywhere from 6-6 to 10-2, neither would surprise me. Anything in the middle wouldn't surprise me." But now it's, will LSU win the SEC West? Now it's, can LSU win a national title this season? So pretty drastically different conversations and expectations. So I think that that's what we're going to hear a lot about. We're going to hear a lot from Brian Kelly about how different year 2 is from year 1. He's talked about the foundation, how the foundation is already laid. I expect to hear about what exactly that means, how that's different in practice. I expect to hear how different his perspective is, how much easier probably his job is this year than it was last year. I expect to hear a lot about the depth, about how LSU has gotten so far in just one calendar year, but still has a long way to go. That's kind of the theme that we heard from Brian Kelly from his recent sit down with Blake Topmeyer of USA Today was, yeah, we did a lot of good things. Yeah, we've come really far, but we also have a long way to go. And depth was one of the major themes of that, of we need more depth. We need more players that are homegrown, that we recruit from high school and we develop throughout their 3 to 4 to 5, maybe even years at LSU. That we're not just digging through the transfer portal every single year, but that we are like an Alabama type of well-oiled machine. One player goes out, that's fine. We've got another option right behind him, and another option right behind that, another option right behind that. So that's what I expect to hear. And that's all fine and dandy. That's all good. Those are all fair questions, fair talking points. But I want to get into what I actually want to hear. What I want to hear from Brian Kelly. And I understand what I want to hear. The questions that I will ask and that I want to be asked aren't necessarily questions that are going to be answered, or aren't talking points that are going to be hit on. But one that I really want to hear about, and one that I intend to ask Brian Kelly at SEC Media Days, is something that I don't think that we have talked about on this podcast or LSU fans have been talking about as a whole, is what's the play calling plan? What is Brian Kelly's expectation to be? How much is he expected to be involved in play calling? Because let's go back to January, February, March, whenever it was, the beginning of Brian Kelly's tenure at LSU. He said, jokingly, I'm going to call the great plays. But really, he said that the play calling duties are going to be Mike Denbrock's job. Fast forward to in the middle of the season against Florida, that was the first time we saw Brian Kelly with a play call sheet in his hand. So we didn't really know, and he explained it by saying, Mike Denbrock's calling the calls. I'm really just there for emphasis or for reassurance or just for a little bit of insurance, really. If Mike Denbrock's calling a call, Brian Kelly, got some of the names jumbled up in my head. Brian Kelly can check it and, chat with Jayden Daniels, kind of be a next level of filtration for the play call. Is that the plan this year? Is that the plan offensively and defensively? Is Mike Denbrock calling 100% of offensive plays? Is Matt House calling 100% of defensive plays? Now with Matt House, I expect him to call. Defense is his baby. Like that is going to be his play calling. That is going to be the Matt House show. Matt, Mike, Brian, y'all. It's a lot of names. But offensively, is that still the plan? How much will Brian Kelly be involved in play calling? And it's not something that we've talked about a lot, mostly because I don't really think we've had a reason to talk about it, because it hasn't really been brought up by Brian Kelly. But we saw the second half of the season, the offense was much better than it was in the first half of the season. Was that a result of the offense overall just being more comfortable? Was that a result of Jayden Daniels being more comfortable? Was that a result of Mike Denbrock learning this offense a little bit better and being able to call plays according to that familiarity? Or did Brian Kelly have a little bit more involvement than we really knew? Is that going to change this year? Now that we have an opportunity to talk to Brian Kelly about it, now that we're getting close into the season, I'd like to know, hey, I don't really expect Mike Denbrock to not be calling plays. I don't expect Brian Kelly to all of a sudden be head coach / offensive coordinator. But what are his expectations for that? Coming up next, I want to get into more things that I want to hear from Brian Kelly about Jayden Daniels, about the quarterback situation as a whole, and what I want to hear from Jayden Daniels himself. We'll get into that coming up next. For a championship team, it is all about making sure that you have the right pieces in place. You want to make sure it's the perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit in just right. So the next time that you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right in the first time around. So you don't have to go back and double back. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Because it's just like in sports. Confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every day is coming up tomorrow on the podcast, or rather next week on the podcast. We will have a full SEC Media Days breakdown, what Brian Kelly had to say, what Jayden Daniels had to say, what everyone at SEC Media Days is saying about LSU. I will bring you a full report live and local from Nashville, Tennessee. So that's all coming up next week on Locked On LSU. One of the things that I wanted to hear from Brian Kelly is just a clarification of who's calling offensive plays. Fair enough. But I also want to hear more about the quarterback position. I want to hear it both from Brian Kelly's point of view and also directly from the horse's mouth, from Jayden Daniels' point of view. From the Brian Kelly side of things, I want to know, how are they managing these two quarterbacks? It's not a secret to me or to you that Garrett Nussmeier probably could be a starting quarterback at darn near every other school in the SEC. There are probably several schools in the country where Garrett Nussmeier would be considered the unanimous starter. Garrett Nussmeier decided to stay at LSU. So are they managing these two quarterbacks between Jayden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier? Are they managing them like they're just quarterbacks? Like it's you're Jayden Daniels and you're Garrett Nussmeier and you're getting similar treatment, you're getting similar reps? Or is it going to be a true starting quarterback versus backup quarterback kind of delegation of duties and reps in practice? How are they approaching it? How are Jayden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier approaching these roles going into this season? And another question that I want to ask Brian Kelly that he's not going to tell us is, what was Garrett Nussmeier promised? I think that we would be naive to think that the thought of transferring never crossed through Garrett Nussmeier's head. Maybe it didn't. Maybe Garrett Nussmeier just loves LSU so much. Maybe Garrett Nussmeier said, hey, look, I pledged my allegiance to LSU, and that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to see it through. And if that is the case, then hats off to Garrett Nussmeier, because that is impressive dedication to an institution that we don't really see these days when it's so easy to transfer. But I want to know, if it was a thought in Garrett Nussmeier's head to transfer, to get starting opportunities elsewhere, what made him stay? What were those conversations between Brian Kelly and Garrett Nussmeier like? How is Brian Kelly approaching this quarterback situation? I'm not even going to call it a battle, because I don't think it's a battle. Because Brian Kelly already came out and said a long time ago, in the conclusion of the season this past year after the Citrus Bowl, one of the first things out of Brian Kelly's mouth was, hey, Jayden Daniels is our starter. This is not a quarterback competition. So I don't want to call it a quarterback competition, because Brian Kelly even literally said that it's not. But how is he managing both of these quarterbacks? How does he plan to manage them? Not just in training camp, not just with the reps in camp, not just with, A team and B team, but how do they plan to use Garrett Nussmeier during the regular season? It's not going to be a two-quarterback system. At least, goodness gracious, I hope not. I don't think that ever works. I don't think that's what they want to do. Brian Kelly's tried that before at Notre Dame. In case you didn't know, didn't work out. But surely Garrett Nussmeier is going to get quality reps, right? That's what I think. But that's when I want to ask Brian Kelly, what's the plan with Garrett Nussmeier? And speaking of the quarterback situation, this is what I want to know from Jayden Daniels. The questions that I want to be asked of Jayden Daniels are questions that I intend to ask Jayden Daniels myself if I get the opportunity. And that's, what is his relationship like with Garrett Nussmeier, both on and off the field? Because from everything that I've seen, it looks like they have a great relationship. Even when Walker Howard was in the building, take the Citrus Bowl, for example, Jayden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier were on the sidelines cheering Walker Howard on. They were dapping each other up. They were chatting. Like, they seem like they have a great relationship, honestly. And I don't think that that's exclusive to either just on the field or off the field. But it's got to be, to a certain extent, maybe awkward. I don't know. And maybe that's why Brian Kelly came out so early and said this is not a quarterback battle. Jayden Daniels is our starter, just to eliminate that awkwardness. And I don't know, but I'd like to know how they approach that relationship. Is it kind of a symbiotic relationship of Jayden Daniels is taking snaps and Garrett Nussmeier is observing to take his own notes, but also observing to help out his teammate? Say, here's what I saw. What were you seeing? Here's what I think that you could do better, and vice versa. I think it's interesting to think about whenever you have two quarterbacks that are, legitimate caliber of a starting quarterback. I also want to know what Jayden Daniels' reaction was when Brian Kelly named him the starter, and how that factored in, how heavy that weighed into his decision to come back to LSU. What kind of conversations were going on behind closed doors before Brian Kelly announced that? Before Brian Kelly announced that Jayden Daniels was going to be the starter, that it wasn't a quarterback competition. Just from his perspective, his point of view, had he all along planned on coming back to LSU? Was there a certain point in the season when he looked at what he's done in his career and how much he was growing and said, hey, look, I already know in October, I'm not going to the NFL. I'm going to have these conversations to see if there's still a place for me on this team next year. I'd like to know a little bit of insight of how that happened, how Jayden Daniels went from what he was doing during the season to deciding to come back, and what external factors played a role into that. I think also just the biggest thing that I want to know from Jayden Daniels, less of a holistic point of view and really just more of a football X's and O's point of view, is what kind of improvements does he think that he's made from this past year? And it's not just from January until July, but I also want to know, behind the scenes, what gears were turning for Jayden Daniels that made it click so well against Florida, against Ole Miss, against Alabama, when the offense really looked like a well-oiled machine, when Jayden Daniels was playing his best football of the year. What changed? Was it his own confidence? Was it confidence between the line and the receivers and the offense? Was a little bit of everything? Did he just need time to understand what was expected of him and how to best execute the offense? And if so, any combination of those, how has that improved over the offseason? How much better does he expect himself to be against Florida State in 2023 versus in 2022? I'd like to get kind of a inside baseball look into the Jayden Daniels side of things, the Jayden Daniels side of football things. What was the difference between the Jayden Daniels we saw in that really solid stretch versus the Jayden Daniels that we saw struggle against Auburn, struggle against Florida State, struggle in that first half against Mississippi State? What are the differences? What played into that? And what has he learned in the offseason to make sure that his play is more reminiscent of the game against Ole Miss, of the Florida game, of the Alabama game, and less so the Auburn game, the Arkansas game, so on and so forth? But Jayden Daniels is not going to be the only player in attendance for LSU. Josh Williams, running back, and Mekhi Wingo, defensive lineman, will be there as well. So what I want to hear from each of those two, we'll get into that coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're just a few days away from SEC Media Days in Nashville from Brian Kelly taking the podium. I'm pumped for it. I am ready to rock. So, kind of talked about what I want to hear from Brian Kelly, what I want to hear from Jayden Daniels, but also a few things that I want to hear from Josh Williams and Mekhi Wingo as well. And I'll start with Josh Williams. Josh Williams is going to his 5th season at LSU. Josh Williams will be the only player in attendance at SEC Media Days that was at LSU pre-Brian Kelly, that didn't just go through the transition, wasn't just experiencing the Brian Kelly era, but experienced the Coach O era of when things started to go downhill a little bit, and of also the transition. He saw what a Coach O coached team versus a Brian Kelly coached team looks like. So that's exactly what I want to hear from Josh Williams. And even when he's asked about it, or if he's asked about it, I don't think that he's going to give you a full, honest answer. And that's no disrespect to Josh Williams. That's not me saying that, he's a liar. It's just, you just can't. His true feelings might not be appropriate to share in a press conference setting. And maybe they might be. Maybe he has nothing but great things to say about both coaches, and he means it wholeheartedly. But I will think it's interesting to see the perspective. And it's not just the same questions of, Coach O versus Brian Kelly in season, but it's now a full season. It's an off season, a full season, and now going and gearing up for the second season. How are those things different? How has that changed? How has the culture around the team changed, not just from last offseason to this offseason, but 2 off seasons ago? Because I think that gives you a more full perspective and picture of what Brian Kelly has done over the past year and a half since he got hired at LSU, since he is the only one that's been there, that's experienced it. From the Mekhi Wingo side of things, I think that he has been such an interesting and encouraging and exciting addition to this team. Because Mekhi Wingo transferred into LSU this past year from Missouri. He was a sophomore, a true sophomore, spent his true freshman season at Missouri, transferred into LSU last year. So Mekhi Wingo, it's not like he's some sort of veteran. It's not like he's been around the block for years and years. I mean, his first year at LSU was only his second year in college football. That's kind of intimidating. But he accepted it in stride. And everything that I've heard about Mekhi Wingo is that he is everything that you would want in a player, not just on the field, but off the field as well. That he stepped up so much as a leader in the locker room. That he physically stepped up when Mason Smith went down with an injury. So what I want to hear from Mekhi Wingo is, what kind of empowered him to do that? And how does he see his role continue to grow? Not just on the defensive line, because I think that is a huge part of it as well. Is how much different does this defensive line look this year with a healthy Mason Smith and a Mekhi Wingo going into year 2, probably feeling so much more confident and empowered in year 2 than he was in year 1. And Harold Perkins' new role in year 2. How has he seen the line shift? But also, how has he seen his role shift from year 1 to year 2? How much more vocal of a leader is he in the locker room? And how does he see that as being an important element for this football team? And how much more successful this football team can be now that not just himself, but so many other young leaders have years under their belt. It's not just him. It's not just Harold Perkins. Will Campbell, Emory Jones. 2 true freshmen that had massive roles in year 1 and have even bigger roles in year 2. Mason Taylor being another one. I view Mekhi Wingo as kind of, at least for this week, for SEC Media Days, him being kind of the spokesperson for this young core. And I view the young core being himself, Harold Perkins, Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Mason Taylor. I'll even throw some of the transfers into the mix in a Denver Harris. maybe even a Garrett Nussmeier if we want to include him and being the quote-unquote young core, even though he's got a couple more years on him than like a Mekhi Wingo or a Harold Perkins does. But I think that since Brian Kelly has taken such a holistic point of view of foundation and leadership and culture, how has that trickled down into these individual players? And how much sense of ownership and pride do they have in their own roles in that culture? And really overall from all three of them, I want to know, when we're talking about the foundation and the culture and how it's already set. Brian Kelly has said that before, and it makes sense. In year 2, you already are steps ahead of year 1. But what does that actually look like? We can say all day long, the culture is established. The foundation is there. But what does that mean exactly? How do they see that on a day-to-day basis at practice, in the weight room, in the classroom, with the young guys, with some of the older guys, some of the leaders on this team? How is the overall vibe different exactly? And how do they think that's going to translate on the field? How lucrative do they think that's going to be from July talking about culture to October and November when you talk about culture? Because anybody can have a good culture in July. When you start losing games or when you start getting injured or when things start getting tough, that's really when the culture matters. But I'm pumped. I'm super excited for SEC Media Days. I'm super excited that we as LSU fans have so much to be excited about going into this season. That although this program still has a whole lot of question marks, although this program is far from perfect, I'm so excited to be cheering for a football team that my team is one of the hot topics of the week for a good reason, because people are buying into this program. Now, the real question is, are you going to execute and you're going to give people reason to buy into this program? Now, those are questions for September and October. Now, for July, it's talking season. And man, oh man, do I love it. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Every dayers next week on the podcast, SEC Media Breakdown. What Brian Kelly said, what Jayden Daniels said, what Josh Williams said, what Mekhi Wingo said, what every reporter at SEC Media Days is saying about LSU. All of that coming up on next week's edition of Locked On LSU.